Okay, for some reason I'm being censored. So we're back. Like and subscribe, like and subscribe. Uh, Apparently, they, the people that designed I don't know, latency and data rates, don't want you to watch this video. Um, I actually have no idea. Maybe I'm being censored. It cut out as soon as I said that the Duke of Orleans was a Freemasonic puppet of the British. So I don't know, but we were reading this. If you didn't watch part one, go watch part one, because otherwise you're going to get lost. So I was talking about Louis Salaron, who's the father of Georges Salaron, who programmed. He was the spiritual advisor when this papal assassin father, Juan Fernandez Maria Krohn, came to the Switzerland seminary for the Society of St. Pius X. Uh, so we had talked about the Duke of Orleans. Was promoted by Louis Salaron heavily in the media. I mean, Louis Salaron was a very, very close friend of this guy. The Count Henry of Orleans married into the Turn on Taxes family, which is all throughout this whole thing. And he was the cousin of the Freemasonic puppet, the Duke of Orleans. Let's see. Did it cut out again? That could be like the magic words if you want to shut down someone's stream. Going on. So Charles Benoist was Count Henry's closest advisor, a major member of Action Française, and probably relation to modern fascist Alain de Benoist. I've never actually established a hard link, and it's kind of a common name, but in the same time and place. Louis Salaron founded Itineraires journal with Lafront's publisher John Madrian, and John Madrian. Lafront National is the Le Pen party. So he founds this magazine with founder of the Le Pen party. Um, Writers were made up of Pétain defenders, ultramontanists, and anti-Vatican II traditionalists. Also unrevealed to the general public is the inability of authorities to keep Krohn in prison, despite being a violent fascist agitator. After the attempted assassination of the Pope, Fernandez Maria Krohn was in prison for 6 years. Short sentence. After his release, he had a strange history of perpetrating violence with little consequence, as if someone was watching out for him. First, during his imprisonment 1981, 1985, his publications against the Pope were distributed internationally in several languages. And I haven't yet been able to track down the publishers that did this. I mean, they seem to be fairly predominant publishers, though, because I found some other publications that are in bibliographies and things by the publishers. So he was released in 1985 and deported to Belgium, which I think is a step up from Portugal. Becomes a lawyer and an accountant working in Belgium and Spain. He gains notoriety for slapping a judge in Belgium. At some time, he establishes contacts with a Nouvelle Droit founder and Alexander Dugan collaborator Alain de Benoist. 1996, he's convicted for arson against the Basque Basque Separatist Party. 2000, he attempts to assault or assassinate the King Albert II, King of Belgium, and is arrested. The same year, in July, he attempts to approach Juan Carlos, the King of Spain, during a protest by breaching security. Now, I don't know if he had weapons on him at these times. He did try to get extremely close to these individuals, accuse them of being communists, etc., which is the same thing he did with Pope John Paul II. I think that as a protected asset, Juan Fernandez Maria Krohn might be used as kind of a symbol from the Club of Rome, from these fascist networks that, listen, we're going to send this guy over here. Or we sent this guy over here. You know what he's capable of doing. He's crazy enough to do it. He's protected. You know we can get to you. that kind of thing. I don't think they would actually use him to carry out the assassinations because he's very old now, and also he's unstable. But it's a good way to threaten somebody. And effectively, that is already what he's doing, because he was part of these fascist groups that are going out there and protesting. So, it kind of already happened. Like, it's kind of proven. And we know that these fascist groups are controlled by aspects of the black wealth oligarchy and their minions. Uh, 2008 to 2013, Juan is published by Periodista Digital, the digital journalist, and boasts 500,000 visits internationally, 4,000 articles on current issues, and about 300 poems. 2013, Juan is removed from digital journalist for supporting the assault by Phalange members on the Blanquera Cultural Center. 2014, Juan begins to publish pro-Franco anti M15 movement, which is the anti-austerity movement, and other materials through publishers Circulo Rojo, and has a book tour set up in Spain and Belgium. And he has a book tour in Spain, targeting youth and recruiting youth at these events. So Circulo Rojo is they're decent. They're not like some of these vanity publishers. They're decent publishers, and he has very decent publishing done on a bunch of historical works. And he's kind of become a cult figure, like a cottage industry cult figure, like many of these traditionalist individuals, like somebody like Sir Charles Coloumbe and something like this. Not extremely well known, but they're capable of getting something like a knighthood. Now, in terms of social media, he's not as strong. That's not his strong point. I don't think that Spanish society is really big on social media. He has 11 subscribers on his YouTube channel, but he's obviously selling enough books to make it profitable. And because Spain is a localist, has always been kind of a regionalist, localist society, that's more of the way in which he would operate. So I have a poster there that you can't see, but it's fairly well produced. That's for his book tour. Juan is still around, but most people have forgotten he exists since he has settled down now. However, I would hope EIR sees the relevance of Juan's story. As Dugan Benwast aligned Steve Bannon founds a Gladiator School for radical right-wing Catholics with the help of Princess Gloria Tornataxis, one cannot help but notice the daunting creep towards a training ground for multiple protected assassination assets like Juan Fernandez Krohn running amok around Europe. The Gladiator School, in Bannon's own words to the New York Times, was established to bring Europe back into the Victorian ages, if not to the Dark Ages. The Tornataxis link cannot be stressed enough in this red-brown-blue alliance. Olavo de Carvalho, the advisor to Brazilian fascist president Jair Bolsonaro, is a disciple of the Braganza family's Plenio de Oliveira of the Society for Defense of Tradition Family Property, which was kicked out of Venezuela with the help of EIR for trying to assassinate the Pope, in which Juan Fernandez Krohn has visited before his own assassination attempt. We also have more information. This isn't part of the letter, but it's a book called Walking Ghosts, Murder and Guerrilla Politics in Colombia. Tradition, Family, and Property is part of, I think, sister group of something that forms Morena, which is a paramilitary narco. So they're simultaneously fighting against drugs, but they're also, their big scam is, we want to protect our agricultural land so the government can't take it for, this is the whole reason Tradition, Family, Property, which runs things like America Needs Fatima. It runs a large part of the traditionalist movement in North America as funding conduit for down and these operations alongside Opus Dei. In here, they form something called the Morena Organization in Colombia, which they defend their property, right? They defend these large landed estates, and they end up growing drugs on the property and using that to finance their expansion and political expansion and all of that. Simultaneously, one half of the organization goes out and hunts guerrilla drug dealers and things like this, and on the other half, they protect the guerrilla drug dealers that they like. So this is Walking Ghosts by Stephen Dudley. And it's just kind of a side thing in here. I mean, they talk more about the Morena organization, but very interesting that it's not just that EIR is checking out. It's that there's this entire web of information that's just out there waiting to be discovered about tradition, family, and property. Like I found from John Horvat and Maria Horvat, who run the LA spinoff group Tradition and Action, that they were in contact with the CIA and establishing the CIA funding of this tradition, family, property. And this all ties into the World Anti-Communist League and all of that stuff. We'll maybe get to that later on. But the turn on taxes family's links cannot be stressed enough in this red-brown-blue alliance. Olavo de Carvalho, the advisor to Brazilian fascist President Jair Bolsonaro, is a disciple of Braganza family's Plinio de Oliveira of the Society for Defense of Tradition and Property. And we already talked about that. Okay. Kicked out of Venezuela, all that. And remember that the father of the programmer, Juan Fernandez Krohn, was a chief agent of the Braganzas, Henry of Olans. The wider picture is that the synarchist monarchist circles around Bannon, Carvalho, Dugan, and Benwist wish to hijack the new Silk Road program. Dugan, a reader of the Executive Intelligence Review, has claimed that his version of the Silk Road will be used to create a Russian-ruled infrastructural system from Vladivostok to Dublin. These forces are historically linked with the French-Russian monarchist traditionalist circles of Joseph de Maistre, which spawned the new right ideologue Julius Evola through René Guénon, the traditionalist Catholics of Lefebvre, and the blood and soil politics of the Bolsheviks. Accordingly, the new counter-Enlightenment is growing disguised as a mere populist fascism, and just as de Maistre, they will rely on the executioner to pursue their Gnostic geopolitical fantasies. Gladiator schools like that of Bannon and fascist training grounds in hesychast monasteries by Dugan, as he calls for a revival of political hesychasm, are harbingers of a strange future of terror and a strategy of tension to come against the BRICS revolution. Only exposure can stop these networks. Sincerely, I read old magazines. So, before I got cut off, please like and subscribe. Please clap. Before I got cut off, I was talking about the other things that I was going to go into. How this ties into Steve Bannon Gladiator School. I think it might be in this Church Militant article. So we'll read this Church Militant article because somebody was posting, oh, the Gladiator School got shut down. Didn't you hear about that? This isn't even a real threat. But no, that's not true. And we'll also read more about Juan Fernandez and his links to the Braganzas. I have a couple articles here that might be rehashes, but they're in a different context with all of this new information. We also need to talk about briefly synarchy in France, because some people don't understand how this thing works. Now, here's another interesting connection, is that synarchy in France produced this prominent banker in the Vichy regime called Felix Rohatyn. Rohatyn goes to New York City after the wars, and maybe during the war, I can't remember. He heads up something that brought Donald Trump into prominence called, which it was basically a financial dictatorship over New York City called MAC, Municipal Assistance Corporation. That is the organization that created the conditions for Trump's empire to grow, and probably worked hand in hand with him. He worked with the Roy Cohn networks around one of the Clinton guys that turned on Clinton, who was involved in setting up this idea that New York City was insolvent in the first place. So, hey, Captain Slappy, like the name. High energy guy, go subscribe to the Captain Slappy if you have a chance. If you love this channel, you'll love Captain Slappy. So what was I saying? And then Felix Rohatyn ends up through the ITT Corp. I believe that's what it was called. Corporation in Chile supporting Augusto Pinochet's regime, despite Augusto Pinochet being a fascist and all of these things, supposedly a Nazi, But he comes from the synarchist progeny. So we're going to go into this article on Steve Bannon's Gladiator School, just because it's fresh news. Court rules in favor of Bannon's Gladiator School. This is from Church Militant TV. And this is a group tied in with Opus Dei and the Braganzas. Michael Voris, in 2011 maybe, was knighted in the Order of St. Gregory by the Braganzas. And if you're aware of the whole scandal between E. Michael Jones and Mark Brammer and Father Paul Nicholson and Michael Voris, you'll know that there's some weird shenanigans going on there. And this is probably the first Catholic knight who is HIV positive. So this is somebody who's going to, in the future, be telling traditional Catholics what's what in the world. This is by Christine Kreislieb from churchmilitant.com, December 23rd, 2019. Tresolti, Italy. An Italian court is agreeing with former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon that the eviction of his Gladiator School from a medieval monastery may be unlawful. At the end of February, Bannon, chairman of the Dignitatis Humanae Institute, which we'll add an aside here, is being taken over by Opus Dei supernumeraries, which are the sugar daddies of Opus Dei. We'll go into Opus Dei too. One amazing fact that I discovered that triggers traditionalist Catholics is that the Opus Dei is controlled by women. Their central executive committee is ruled by a bunch of short-haired women that look kind of Khazarian, which I wouldn't have a problem otherwise. It's just something that's just demonstrating itself as a traditional ultra-conservative, as they call it, paleo-conservative Catholic organization. These are the people that pick the head of Opus Dei. Now, there's also an all-men group, but it's not. That all-men group does not pick the candidates for the leader of Opus Dei. So it's a very strange thing. And we could do multiple series on Opus Dei. Along with, so at the end of February, Bannon, chairman of the Dignitatis Humanae Institute, and I'll also say something about Cardinal Burke. Cardinal Burke's trying to distance himself from this too. So some of the church hierarchy are maybe a little bit wary about the Evolian Fascist takeover of the church, just as many Orthodox are wary of things like Jay Dyer or Alexander Dugin's influence on the revival of political hesychasm along an Evolian line. So Bannon, along with Benjamin Harnwell, DHI's founder and president, negotiated a 19-year lease for Tresolti Charter House, a 12th century Carthusian abbey located north of Rome. Almost before the ink was dry, Italy's Ministry of Culture, the government entity responsible for the lease, had second thoughts about the deal and attempted to evict DHI. On December 5th, it turned up heat and gave DHI 10 days to vacate the premises. It also gave a deadline on December 16th in annulling the 19-year lease. Harnwell told Church Militant surrounding these activities was a 2.5-year drumbeat of lies, distortions, and misrepresentations. Harnwell immediately contested the eviction, and on December 18th, the same day Bannon learned Trump was impeached, an Italian tribunal ruled that DHI dodged an eviction bullet and will have its day in court, potentially to fully ratify the lease agreement. Suspending the eviction order as well as the October 16th lease annulment, the tribunal agreed with Harnwell that the DHI's position is not without legal foundation. It also noted that the ministry has failed to back up its claims that the DHI issued false or mendacious statements. Harnwell will be given a chance to argue his case. The tribunal also ordered the ministry to pay £1,000 in court costs. As Church Militant has reported, DHI is a Rome-based organization that describes itself as a think tank with the aim of protecting and promoting human dignity based on the anthropological truth that man is born in the image and likeness of God. It works with legislators to promote the Christian voice in the public arena, which it says is silenced. So they say that man is born in the image and likeness of God, but these same people are associated with the Club of Rome and all the anti-growth things. They're anti-Renaissance type organizations, which is kind of the basis of the Renaissance. it grew out of the Filioque concept that the Holy Spirit proceeds from Christ as well. The Abbey has been a source of concern for the region because of its cultural significance. It is a prominent tourist destination and source of revenue, but the Abbey is nearly empty with only a few monks remaining. When Italy's Ministry of Culture announced it would make Tresolti available for the lease, DHI applied. Bannon and Harnwell planned for the Abbey to be both the headquarters for DHI and the academy for the Judeo-Christian West, what Bannon called a school for gladiators that would train a new generation of political leaders in the tradition of Judeo-Christian values. So this is a Zio-fascist, Evolian fascist movement. And if you remember, Count Koldenhof Kalergi, who everybody views as like the pinnacle of the so-called Jewish conspiracy, it's not a Jewish conspiracy, it's an aristocratic conspiracy, worked alongside Prince Julius Evola in coming up with the fascist, Nazi, racial ideologies. And so take that for what it is. But once Bannon's association with DHI and Tresolti became known, local residents voiced objections. Soon, so-called irregularities in the lease were discovered. There were even charges of forgery. Bannon and Harnwell say the trumped-up charges were politically motivated. In October, Harnwell told Church Militant, as the DHI indicated when the Ministry for Culture first announced this politically motivated maneuver back in May, we will fight our case in the court with every resource at our disposal. Now, I'll also say, this Church Militant article is very supportive. You can read it in the just in the way they choose the words and the subjects that they address. This is not objective reporting. This is very biased reporting towards this project because of the Opus Dei and Braganza factor in Church Militant. Here's a big quote. Bannon says the legal wrangling is just dust being kept up in the wind, up by the left. Okay. Harnwell went on to express his confidence in winning his case. We look forward to demonstrating that the objections against DHI promoted by the left over the last 2 years are 100% without any foundation whatsoever. Vox reports Bannon is unperturbed by legal wrangling, who says it is just dust being kept up in the wind by the left. Bannon felt comfortable enough about the situation to head back to Washington, D.C. when he believed Donald Trump's presidency was imperiled. Bannon turned on a dime and within a week's time built a broadcast studio in the basement of Breitbart Embassy where he's devoting himself full-time to defending President Trump against impeachment. His twice-a-day podcast can be found at the War Room Impeachment. In addition to attacks from a left-leaning Ministry of Culture, DHI has had to endure a recent misunderstanding with Cardinal. See, it's a misunderstanding. It's not that Cardinal Burke is disgusted by Steve Bannon. A recent misunderstanding with Cardinal Raymond Burke. In later 2018, Burke agreed to lead DHI's advisory board made up of Catholic clergy. When the rumors that Bannon was considering some level of involvement with a film version of French homosexual sociologist Frédéric Martel's book In the Closet of the Vatican, Burke resigned from his role, distancing himself from Bannon. So we have to look into this Frédéric Martel guy. Let's see if he's associated with the French right. There's not much on him. I know that Alan de Benoist created a. Well, he's definitely associated with Switzerland, which is always a red flag. Alan de Benoist has several sociology-oriented think tanks, and one of their major studies was in conspiracy theory and using conspiracy theory to control people. It's not a new project because the Fabians did this as well. If you remember, Bertrand Russell introduced the Kennedy assassination. He introduced the Permindex factor to Jim Garrison, and later on ran something called the Who Killed Kennedy Committee. And they ended up blaming on the CIA and the mafia and all this. Everybody except the British factor that's involved. And that reminds me of another thing is the Rokor, Russian church outside of Russia, links to to the Kennedy assassination through the Morgan Shield and some other guys that were around Oswald. But on with the article. That's going to be something important later in trying to figure out how ROCOR fits into the World Anti-Communist League, which is pushing all of this Evolian fascism. So we have Burke resigning from his role, distancing himself from Bannon. Harnwell's full statement follows. It is difficult to describe just how aggressive the left is opposing the Academy for Judeo-Christian West has been. The organization, they organized 3 protests and 2 emergency parliamentary hearings, which culminated in the successfully bullying the Italian Ministry of Culture into finding whatever pretext it could to annul the Dignitatis Institute's 19-year lease for the Tresolti Monastery. Surrounding these activities was a 2.5-year drumbeat of lies, distortions, and misrepresentations. The left made the classical error, however, in believing the BS with which it had been saturating news coverage of Tresolti and the extent that it had worked itself into a totally unhinged derangement over supposed mendacious and false statements. Okay, blah, 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 blah. What is it about the DHI's program that turns otherwise harmless, ignorant, and mistakenly leftist activities into zombies from the film day, 28 days later? This is so stupid. This is it's boring statement. And there's just filling up time. Whether the civilization already under existential threat from the hard left, radical Islam, global secularist elites, unsustainable debt, the vertiginous inverted pyramid of future social welfare commitments, and the pending demographic collapse, to name but a few fronts in this current war, survives for our children depends on what we do now. Fans of Church Militant, so he's talking to Church Militant, will not need any persuading of the sad reality that almost to a man, the worldwide episcopal hierarchy, including the Sacred College of Cardinals, up to the self-described Bishop of Rome himself. So here you have a guy issuing a seat of vacantist type statement within these trad circles that are always running after seat of vacantists to try to accuse him of heresy. That's funny. Are now openly allied with the Catholic Church's historical existential enemies and turning into the widening gyre. Here he quotes T.S. Eliot, who's part of these symbolist circles that arose out of the Fabian circles and around René Guénon, these individuals. That's funny. I mean, he's giving all the clues of his real associations here. They rally against the very elect who have held firm to unchanging faith of the apostles. We cannot count on the institutional church, formerly a key pillar of the Western civilization, to defend it at its most perilous hour. For these reasons, we are soon to start a formation program, a gladiator school for culture warriors, under the leadership of Steve Bannon, to take this battle for our future into our hands. You can help us in 2 ways, by participating directly in our activities or by supporting our work financially so that as many of the next generation of possible can benefit from our program. I left a comment. It says, does support for this initiative by Opus Dei's Michael Voris have anything to do with the fact that he was knighted by the Spanish branch of the Gloria Ternentaxis family, since we know that the Gloria Ternentaxis family is quite involved in Steve Bannon's school? We also know that Gloria Ternentaxis family is heavily involved in fascist politics in Brazil through the Spanish branch, through tradition, family, property, disciple, and self-described Gnostic Olavo de Carvalho. It just so happens that Steve Bannon wants Carvalho on his school staff. Yes, in Brazil, they have forced sterilization policies and are trying to make contraception mandatory for the poor. The very Catholic aristocrats you think are so noble are behind these kinds of things. And of course, nobody responded to me, either because Church Militant has no actual... people just watch videos. But also, nobody's going to touch that comment because they're too scared. They have these serotoninogenic diets, as Ray Pete talks about, or the Ray Pete knockoffs talk about. Partially caused by a certain kind of fasting, which leads them to completely be incapable of dealing with new information. So here's a EIR report. Is turn on taxes tied to the assassination of the Pope? Actually, let's read the investigative leads one, because I think this actually might be more juicy. Let's see if the individual's actually in here. This might tie some things together. And so this is investigative leads in EIR. At some point, they spun off EIR and they produced a separate magazine called Investigative Leads, which had a super high. It was super expensive, and I cannot find any copies of it. It was a private intelligence service of basically all the derivative stuff from these investigations. And I'd love to get my hands on that stuff. Hospitaller Knights of the New Dark Age by Scott Thompson. This is back in 1982. Investigation of the networks responsible for the May 12, 1982 attempt to assassinate Pope John Paul II has now uncovered the fact that the Secretary of State, Alexander Haig, who I believe is also involved in the this is a timely thing because involved in the installation of the Iranian mullahs of the modern state of Iran, is a witting participant in a secret cult network that poses the principal assassination threat potential against both President Ronald Reagan and the Pope. This network centers upon the transnational branch of the Hospitaller Order, aka Order of St. John of Jerusalem, aka Knights of Malta. Now, all these things used to be different groups. In 1888, I believe that the Knights of Malta rejected the British Order of St. John of Jerusalem, but sometime between those 2 points, the British basically took it over, and these black wealth families basically took it over and turned it into an ecumenical order. It does not any longer represent Catholic tradition. And, you see things like the contraception scandal that arose with that whole thing. And the fact that the Malteser International is pushing the sustainability agenda and all of this crap. Directly associated with Haig is a secret cult network, is a John Birch Society representative Larry McDonald, Democrat from Georgia, head of the cult's military subversion front organization, Western Goals Incorporated of Alexandria, Virginia, in Munich, West Virginia, and also associated with this network is General Jack Singlaub. The Hospitaller network represents a higher-level control point over the same networks of assassins behind the 2 attempts upon John Paul II and the attempted killing of President Reagan. Now, if this sounds strange to you, realize that the Knights of Malta are the only sovereign country. They have an observer status in the UN. The reason why they use this order, special privileges, is because they can make up false diplomatic documents. And they did this during Iran-Contra. A bunch of Iran-Contra people were caught with Knights of Malta diplomatic papers or passports. There's a distinction between those 2 things. So that's that. You might think, oh, that's so crazy. How could it be a papal assassination network? And it's like, no. I mean, these are people that have their own private military, and just like Blackwater Z Academy under Eric Prince that works with them, or that is in Knights of Malta, they have the same kind of thing going on. They had the same kind of thing going on before Eric Prince. They have their own military gear, special ops equipment, all of this stuff. So, going on. Origin of the Hospitaller Order. The Hospitaller Order was founded about 1050 AD in Jerusalem by Pope Gregory I and Venetian merchant banking interests to serve as a crusading military and religious order for the oligarchs who brought feudalism to Europe after the Carolingian city builders were routed from the outset. The Hospitallers' main strength lay in their vast political intelligence capability. And here's another objection that we might hear from Catholics, is that my Templars, and if you ever see all the Catholic stuff that's hearkening back to the Templars, and you see a Templar kneeling and praying and all of this stuff. The Templars were heretics. They joined with the Bogomil Cathar, which is the modern root of the Gnosticism in Europe, the Cathar cults, and all these other Persian mystery schools, and became heretics. It might be a warning about the nature of holy war and all of this crap. Like, why are you romanticizing a bunch of heretics? It just doesn't make sense to me. If you have a brain, In the first half of the century, it was oligarchical families that hold commanding positions within the hospitaller network, including the Turner-Taxis and Wittelsbach and others, who created Hitler's Bavarian Nazi Party. Though they successfully distanced themselves from the Nazis after the creation, especially after the 1938 Anschluss, these families did not completely dump the Hitler project until after Stalingrad in 1943. They also kind of jumped the ship over to the pan-Europeans. With the aid of the secret agreements worked out between Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the OSS Representative Alan Dulles, typified by Dulles' negotiations for a secret surrender with SS General Karl Wolff, arrangements were made to preserve strains of the Nazi experiment for use in the ensuing Cold War. And that's going to be the Black International World Anti-Communist League, the Gladiator networks. Major branches of the order. There are four primary branches of the original ensuing hospitaller order in existence today. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta, SMAM, was rechartered by the papacy in 1815. When Napoleon conquered the Hospitallers' Island on the base of Malta in 1798, Tsar Paul I of Russia assumed protectorship of the order. After his assassination, his son Alexander I relinquished this office to the papacy. The SMAM remains affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church, though it has been condemned by Popes John 23rd and Pope Paul VI. I don't think it's been condemned. I think it's they were launching investigations into and the operations which they were carrying out were condemned by both of these individuals, who are not perfect people either. They were not the best of popes. It is the only branch with true sovereignty and has diplomatic immunity for its emissaries and offices on the Via Guardotti in Rome. Under the current Grand Master Prince Angelo, and remember this 1982, Prince Angelo di Moriana di Colonna. Well, the Colonnas are the original, some of the worst of the black nobility. The SMAM is controlled by the leading families of the Italian black nobility, including the House of Savoy, the Pallavicini, Orsinis, Borgheses, and the Spadaforos. The SMAM represents the higher level control of the propaganda duo, Masonic Lodge of former Mussolini's secret police OVRA official Licio Galli, all the forerunner chiefs of military and intelligence sections in Italy who were ousted for their secret membership in the P2 Lodge, has also been invested into SMAM. Italian magistrates are currently investigating propaganda duo as an international coordination center for narcotics, for repeated coup d'etat attempts and assassinations, deploying red and black terrorism, that's communist and fascist terrorism, ranging from the Italian Red Brigades to Ordine Nero. The first exposés of P2 were made by Vatican-linked officials in retaliation for May 13, 1981 attempt to assassinate Pope John Paul II. Outside Italy, leading members of SMAM include the prominent families of the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire, such as the Turner-Taxis family of Regensburg. Remember, the papal assassin Krohn, alleged to have passed through Regensburg either before or after the assassination. This is also where Steve Bannon's the Regensburg Castle. Steve Bannon wants to have the auxiliary part of the school and holds these salons with Gloria Turner-Taxis, Cardinal Burke, and others, where Cardinal Vigano came from, or no, the news from Cardinal Vigano kind of first penetrated and was disseminated from there. So the Turner-Taxis family of Regensburg, Bavaria, and closely intermarried Lobkowitz family of Bohemia and Braganza family of Portugal. Now the Lobkowitz are interesting because he was a doctor at Notre Dame before it was taken over by Hesburg, Father Hesburg, and had a heavy influence on the tutoring of E. Michael Jones, and I think the development of E. Michael Jones' solidarism, which is basically I had somebody tell me that solidarism is so much different from distributism. But no, Lobkowitz was one of the major promoters of solidarism in Latin America, Prince Lobkowitz. And the probably considered greatest solidarist, E.F. Schumacher, heavily influenced by Heinrich Pesch, basically just combined it with distributism, and you end up with the small is beautiful economy, which is the same thing. It's the same program as everything else here. Um, if you want to know what a real competent, because E. Michael Jones kind of likes Friedrich List. Well, Friedrich List goes on to inspire Durang, who was targeted by Marx and Engels for basically adopting some of the good things about Marx and throwing out the rest. And then Durang influences the Catholic American Henry C. Carey, who is one of the greatest economists and very formative to the American system of political economy and the system of political economy in the Irish Republic after the Easter Rising. So Lobkowitz is the E. Michael Jones link to these networks. And it took me a while to figure that out because E. Michael Jones is not a basic guy. He is a deeper diver. He's more intellectual than most of these pundits. And so he has to have a deeper cover, I think. And I don't completely think that E. Michael Jones is a bad guy, but recently he has what the ADL called a working relationship with the Evolian fascist Dugin defender Israel Shamir. So, and he's rebranded himself with kind of the edgy Evolian fascist alt-right label. He talks with Red Ice and all of these other Evolian fascist news organizations. So, going on, though, we were talking about Prince Lobkowitz, who is part of the Taxis family of Bohemia and the Braganza family of Portugal that bear immediate responsibility for the May 12th, 1982 attempt to assassinate the Pope at the Our Lady of Fatima shrine in Portugal. These oligarchical families join and oversees a network of feudalist cults that have burrowed within the Catholic Church, including followers of the schismatic Archbishop Lefebvre, who personally ordained Pope John Paul II's would-be assassin, Father Juan Fernandez Krohn, the far-reaching Blue Army of Fatima cult, and the Tradition family and property. The Braganza family founded a paramilitary group whose members in Brazil have been photographed using a picture of John Paul II for target practice. I've actually seen this picture. It was hard to find, but they say see Executive Intelligence Review June the 8th, and it's in there. And that's June 8th, 1982. The Most Venerable Order of Hospital of St. John Jerusalem, affiliated with the Anglican Communion and under the direct protectorship of Queen Elizabeth II, is a revival of the English Priory of the Hospitallers that had been dormant since Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church. Its revival in 1831 was part of the Oxford movement, Tractarian effort to penetrate the Catholic Church and foment schisms under its current Grand Master, the Duke of Gloucester. I think the Oxford movement also promoted some of the Sufi insanity that you see in modern-day Islam, including like the Iranian mullahs. Now, I'm not anti-Iranian in terms of country, but it is that insane zealotry which overthrew the Shah. And that was fomented by people like Zbigniew Brzezinski and the Trilateral Commission. But we're going on. Under its current Grand Master, the Duke of Gloucester, the MVO has recruited from among the wealthiest and most influential families of Great Britain, the Commonwealth, and the United States. Members of the MVO dominate the boards of four major City of London clearinghouse banks: Barclays, National, Westminster, Standard and Chartered, and Lloyds. Now, Barclays Bank is behind the Brexit. The guy that was Stephen Barclay, who was put in charge of the Brexit Commission, is not only a family member but ran the Barclays money laundering division. It's supposed to be anti-money laundering division. The Barclays were, I think, King Edward VII. It was one of the King Edwards. William Pete Barclay was the accountant of the Crown. And they had this company called KPMG, which is involved in, it's one of the big four accounting firms in the world. And they have significant deep intelligence ties and money laundering ties. And these are actually things that are all documented too. Like you can go to the Wikipedia page and it quotes mainstream news articles about even attempting to overthrow a country. But these Barclays, the grandson of William P. Barclay, is also one of the closest, most trusted aides of Prince Charles. But the Barclays are completely behind Brexit. They have all these ties to Steve Bannon. Wait, he's the Renaissance Group, I believe. Or was that? No, that's the other guy. Anyway, they have a bunch of ties to Steve Bannon and Trump campaign, Lord Conrad Black, all of these people that I've begun identifying as major players. I can't remember the guy's name because you don't hear a lot about him anymore. But he was also the guy behind Renaissance Technologies. Barclays basically made Renaissance Technologies with a special financial instrument that was made just for them. So the 5 major banks of Canada are also involved in this: the Royal Bank, Bank of Montreal, Bank of Nova Scotia, Toronto Dominion, and Canadian Imperial. And in the United States, members dominate the board of Morgan Guaranty Trust, major media, and many defense-related advanced electronic industries. The U.S. Command Center of the Most Venerable Order is the Episcopal Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York, and under Bishop Paul Moore, an heir to the Morgan Allied Moore family, and Canon Edward West, the protocol officer of Queen Elizabeth II. Almost every major figure involved in laundering the estimated $500 billion annual income from illicit narcotics trade has been invested in the Most Venerable Order, including such former bootlegging families as the Bronfmans, Jacobses, and Kennedys, who built the drug routes out of the early whiskey smuggling activity. Another major member of MVO is the Major Louis Mortimer Bloomfield. I can't go into everything that Bloomfield was involved in. A high-ranking member of the Division 5 of the FBI, who was a key coordinator of the Permindex Murder Incorporated Corporation. Now, once again, talking about Martinist networks, FBI, and this is at the time of the foundation of the FBI. FBI was co-founded with a Bonaparte, one of the descendants of the Bonapartes, Napoleon Bonaparte, when Bonaparte was championed by the counter-Enlightenment people like Joseph de Maistre. And de Maistre wrote to Napoleon, and it was de Maistre's books that inspired Napoleon. And de Maistre also is the major founder of traditionalist Catholicism. So, former high-ranking member of Division 5 of the FBI, who was a key coordinator of the Permindex Murder Incorporated Corporation. Permindex, whose board includes several other members of SMOM and MVO, was identified by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison as responsible for the John F. Kennedy assassination by French intelligence, as responsible for dozens of attempts to assassinate French President Charles de Gaulle in the early 1960s. This is also the same network of Vichyite French. The same thing. They trace their lineage back to Joseph de Maistre and the Synarchy, set up by the Martinist St. Yves. Canon Edward West, in his capacity as a chairman of the Tolstoy Foundation. Oh, wow. Gee, Tolstoy, Russian blood and soil politics, oversees a crucial intersection point between British intelligence and the solidarist network of white Russians and Eastern European fascists in such paramilitary terrorist groups as Narodny Trudovoy Soyuz, NTS, codename for Death to Tyrants. The Johanniter Orden, affiliated with the Lutheran Church of Germany, was largely crushed during World War II as part of Churchill's campaign to destroy the Humboldt-trained Prussian nobility. That's Wilhelm von Humboldt, the philologist. After the war, the Johanniterorden, which maintains extensive political intelligence networks in the Baltic states and especially East Germany, was largely taken over by the Anglican Most Venerable Order. Its associations in the Netherlands and Swedish split off and are now under respective former control of former SS officer Prince Bernhard, the co-founder of the Bilderberg Society, and the Swedish Royal House. And the Bilderberg Society, Illuminati, is actually generally made up of, so it's kind of a German branch of the oligarchy. It's made up of a triangle in Germany. You can draw a triangle. between like the Hohenzoller family, Turner, Texas, the Wittelsbach. So when people say, "Oh, the Bilderbergs run the world," no, they don't. It's just a faction of the nobility, their own separate little group. 1961, these three major hospital branches signed a convention of alliance to form an international secretariat that is based in Geneva and Zurich, Switzerland. One of the chief officials of the alliance, Sir Ferdinand Ultramer, is close relatives of Georges Ultramer, the founder of the Swiss Nazi Party, which served as part of Alan Dulles' network and liaison with top fascist circles in Germany and Italy during the war. Also remember that I believe the Jewish establishment in the West is based out of Switzerland, under one the big mega group guy who is related to the cosmetics industry, Laudner. And so all these people that think that they're fighting Nazis or fighting the Jews or fighting Nazis, it is the Hofjuden black wealth dynamic in this specific context that is playing off of these things to gain the world order that they want. Their actual objective is a new dark age, cosmopolitan city centers, and then a kind of, for the rest of the world, like a Disneyland Epcot Center sort of thing of different regions and different cults and all of these things. And that's what a Europe of regions is. And that's kind of also the idea that Alexander Dugin wants, except under a Russian empire. So we're talking about the Swiss Nazi Party served as part of Alan Dulles' networks and liaison with top fascist circles in Germany and Italy during the war. Ultramer is in turn associated with Swiss banker Francois Genoud, who is the chief financier source for the post-war activities of the Fascist International. According to well-informed sources, castles maintained by the orders in Geneva and also in Luxembourg provide facilities for training assassins, similar to the facility in Malaga, Spain, that trained Father Juan Fernandez Krohn. Now, this is news to me because I thought he came out of the Krohn seminary, but there might be a different location involved. Krohn was implicated as an assassin in 2 earlier cases. So here's an investigative lead. I don't know. They say he assassinated 2 other people. So that's 2 assassinations, 1 attempted assassination of the Pope, attempted assassination of the King of Belgium, attempted assassination of Juan Carlos. I never heard of that. If I can find more information on that, that's a pattern. That's more than a pattern. The Fourth Order, the Sovereign Order of St. John of Jerusalem, aka the Russian Order, descends from the group of knights who sought the protection of Tsar Paul I after the conquest. Did this just? No. After Napoleon's conquest of the order's base in Malta. The order was revived in the early 20th century by the Russian nobility, who feared impending revolution, and following 1917, its leaders included Grand Duke Alexander and Grand Duke Cyril, worked in exile to help launch the Nazi experiment as a means to reconquer Russia. Affiliated variously with Uniate Roman Catholics, the Lefebvrist Traditionalists, the Russian Orthodox Church, and other Orthodox churches and sects, the Russian orders today splintered into 16 or more subgroups, which act as a throwaway spin-offs of political intelligence operations of the other major orders. The most visible threat to the life of President Reagan at this time comes from a throwaway branch of the Russian orders chartered in 1763 by King Peter II of Yugoslavia, who became a leading asset during and after World War II of the British royal family secret intelligence service. It is this branch that Representative MacDonald belongs to, while Al Haig is a member of the closely affiliated Danish association founded by Prince Peter of Greece and Denmark. Ironically for MacDonald, Singlaub, and Haig, through this Fourth Order ties into Russian Orthodox and Antiochian Church, both are brought into association with KGB-contaminated circles of the Andropov, Soslov, Kim Philby Russian chauvinist faction of the Soviet Union. And that's the Cambridge Five, that we're always talking about Dostoevsky at Cambridge. I put out a tweet criticizing Jay Dyer, where I said the Soviet slash FSB agent is not going to be running around talking about Lenin and Marx. He's not going to be talking about Putin. He's going to be talking about Dostoevsky, because that's exactly what somebody like Burgess did, who wrote Clockwork Orange, after he went to Soviet or to Russia. He started writing, adding Dostoevsky and Dostoevsky's ideas into Clockwork Orange. The KGB faction in the Kremlin is well aware of the importance of the Hospitallers. It offered to exchange ambassadors with Smolensk before World War II and has maintained a special bureau to monitor the order since the Bolshevik Revolution. This is what the KGB referred to as the Black International. So there's that article. That is jam-packed full of facts. Let's find something about the synarchy that's rather brief to kind of wrap this up. Synarchy Vichy. This is a recent article here. Now, I will include links to Juan Fernandez page, so you can go check that out. He has two now. He has one in French. So I think they're going to try to get him to start recruiting people in France as well. Okay. Now, here's a link to the Neocons. So everybody thinks that there's a difference between the traditionalists and neocons, even though they all quote the same philosophers, except the neocons were former Trotskyites and are generally made up of people from the same tribe. The traditionalists are just a different tribe, so to speak, that basically borrow the ideology from all the same philosophers. So this is an article by Lyndon LaRouche Jr., 2006, June 3rd. Is Cheney's war plan stalled? Okay, so he's talking about Pierre Boudry. Pierre Boudry's heavily documented summary of the comparable situation in the 1940s France, dominated by the treasonous synarchist International, points to the identity of the related danger inside the U.S. today. The synarchist terrorist fifth column in 1940s France is continued as the same circles which have deployed Cheney from the same higher level of international finance power, which their forebears represented in wartime France. So here's Boudry's article. On May 25th, Lyndon LaRouche issued a public warning. Okay, we just read that. Okay. Here's a quote from LaRouche. One is drawn to the parallel with the Nazi invasion in 1940. Contrary to most historical accounts, the cause of the Nazi overrun of France was not the failure of the Maginot Line and similar defenses held against the Habsburg invaders during the 18th century. The cause of the 1940 fall of France was the presence with France of a synarchist fifth column associated with the Lazard-sponsored Bank of Worms circles. The security operations for the World War would be technically adequate and competent if the threats were coming exclusively from domestic sources or even agencies like those behind the infamous 1972 Munich bombing attacks. However, these capabilities are not geared for dealing with a fifth column operation of the sort being contemplated by Schultz, Rohatyn, there's Felix Rohatyn, Cheney, and their European synarchist allies. No conventional defense is adequate to stopping that kind of assault. LaRouche highlighted the insidious role of the synarchist international cabal, opening the back door for the Nazi invasion. The treasonous synarchist fifth column and the Sedan Cap. Prior to the May-June 1940 period of the Nazi invasion of France, a synarchist fifth column within the French government had prepared a plan to let Hitler enter the country without opposition through the Ardennes region and flank the French defenses with precisely the rapid tank deployments that the French government had rejected from the plans of Charles de Gaulle. Strategically speaking, the success of the synarchist plan of a German invasion required that the French troops be sent into Belgium in order for them to be cut off from the rest of the French army and captured in the rear. This policy implied, therefore, that the Maginot Line should not be extended to the sea, but that the gap be left open in the northern corridor region of the Ardennes for the invaders to come through. French military leader Marshal Henri Pétain had vetoed an appropriation for the extension of the Maginot Line called for the government by Edouard Daladier. So This is why the pro-Pétain faction of Louis Saluran, they had to apologize for Pétain all the time after the war, why they did not like Charles de Gaulle. Um, Going on. If you can remember back, because I know my videos are very long, if you can remember back to the fact that Louis Saluran, this Vichyite French figure, is father of Georges Saluran, that radicalized this papal assassin as a spiritual advisor. Uh, Consequently, in April 1940, a tactical group gap had been created between Charleville and Sedan, that is, between the Maginot Line and the Vanguard line of defense. The command center of French army made sure that the Sedan entry point would not be closed or defended. During a period of 3 days, the German command pushed through the gap with no less than 70 divisions and 3,500 tank units. At the Riom trial, abortive trials of French leaders by the Vichy government in 1942, Colonel Rivet confirmed that the French headquarters was aware on April 20th, 1940, that the Sedan-Charleville Gap was going to be the entry point of the German invasion, and the commander Watteau's artillery group had been forbidden to establish anti-tank defense on the narrow corridor where the Germans invaded. According to a French investigator, Robert Husson, the official court report stated, the road through the Ardennes, which represents the access to the gap of Charlottesville and Sedan, was kept open deliberately for the invasion, and the fortifications were destroyed in May 1940 by the orders of the GQG of the Second Army General Hunziker. The Watteau report at the Rheims trials. That's a quote from a report against certain Vichyite officials. General Hunziker was a Sunarchist Vichy military commander who later signed the armistice with Hitler. As a result of the deal made between the French Synarchist fifth column of Hitler, the Nazi invasion of France was so successful that after only 2 weeks of penetration in May 1940, the British and French forces had been pushed all the way to the English Channel, and German offenses was suddenly halted. Hitler and Churchill made a deal to save the British and French troops at Dunkirk because the British troops had been taken prisoner. Had the British troops been taken prisoner, Hitler would have won World War II right then and there. However, the Synarchy plan was not to win an early war, but to wage perpetual warfare. The British troops were spared to fight another day. The point is that during the German invasion in early as May 1939, the Synarchy International had total control of the French government with 6 ministers. The Synarchist fifth column was headed by Albert Pierre Sarrat, Interior Minister, Raymond Paternoster, Minister of National Economy and Production, Anatole de Monzier, Minister of Public Works, Charles Pommeret, Minister of Labor, Raoul Dautry, Minister of Armament, and Camille Chartems, Vice President of the Council. 5 of them were from the original Secret d'Action Revolutionaries, which spells out Czar, CSAR, of the Synarchist Movement of Empire, SME. Moreover, Chartems, Monzier, Marcando, and Sarrat had been permanent Synarchy fixtures inside the French government, with the exception of those of Léon Blum, from as early as Edouard Herriot government of June 1932. Too many French names. People might not even think I'm speaking English. Just prior to the invasion, the French intelligence service had reorganized the Cinquième Bureau, thereafter led by a selected group of about 60 members of the Synarchy. These Synarchists had been recruited into a very secretive function to compile and profile all information concerning approximately 600,000 people who were considered to be dangerous to national defense. The enormous file contained all of the militants of the political parties of France, unions, Protestants, etc. It was this giant PC Victor file which served to purge the southern part of France from all undesirable officers and NCOs. As a result of political section, the right-wing elements that were made prisoner by Germans were not more than about 10% of the total. That is about 190,000 of the total of 1,900,000 French prisoners taken at the beginning of the invasion. Before the end of 1941, most of the 190,000 right-wing prisoners were returned to France. Thanks to follow-up selection made by Germans themselves, this was the most perfidious act of premeditated genocide that the French financial oligarchy had ever committed against its own people, the most devastating purge of Republican forces ever effected against any nation in European history, all of which was done under the pretext of avenging the bloodshed of 1789. Since the selection had been so effective, other lists were made up to the level of industries, trades, and among general population. These were used for triage of labor force that would be chosen for forced labor in Germany for the entire duration of the war. In the end, the quasi-totality of the so-called left, that is, the Republican militants and sympathizers, were either shot by the Germans, 70,000 died in Vichy concentration camps, 40,000 or were imprisoned in Germany, 420,000. The number of French people sent to forced labor in Germany remains unknown. Give a moment of silence, some tears for the French Republicans. Not quite the. The shark jumping numbers. These aren't numbers that'll jump the shark, but they're pretty high. Intelligence on the Synarchist Bank of Worms. So here's another thing: is you will read damage control articles out there that the Synarchy never existed. There were people who literally called themselves Synarchists and organized under a group that was called the Synarchists. I don't know how you can debunk that. I really don't. It's just that's damage control for English language sources. If you actually go in, like this is the thing with the Dutroux affair, if you go in and read Belgium, or the thing with the TFP, if you go in and read Spanish language stuff, you will always find these massive scandals that really happened that are not published over into English language. And English-speaking people just believe that they just have this false sense of that they know everything that's happening in the world, when really they're kept behind this language barrier. Intelligence on the Synarchist Bank of Worms. French and American intelligence reports from the period have revealed that systematic sabotage of the French industrial sector and of the military had been undertaken by this fifth column, and behind the scenes French-German collaboration had been effective for several years prior to the invasion. For example, in a dispatch dated January 7, 1942, U.S. Ambassador Anthony J. Drexel Biddle revealed to President Roosevelt the magnitude of the Synarchist financial control of the Vichyite government that had been working with Germany. This group, wrote Biddle from London, should be regarded not as Frenchmen, as any more their corresponding members in Germany should be regarded as Germans, for the interests of both groups are intermingled so as to be indistinguishable. Their whole interest is focused upon furtherance of their industrial and financial stakes. The Biddle dispatches go far into descriptions of the main Synarchist cabal of bankers and their connections to Pierre Laval regime of Vichy. Some of these have been in Daladier government before the war. Biddle's dispatches included the names of a very powerful group of commercial bankers. Let me make sure I'm still on the air. I don't want to be fucking Habsburg Strike Back. Oh my god. There's so much stuff here. Howdy doody, Soren and Captain Slappy. Oh, there's 4 people. Hi, everybody. Everybody give this video a like for a chance to win a new video. Okay. If you don't give me likes, I will not be making another video. Okay. Going on. I want to stop here because I just ordered a book about Vichyite France, and it's literally called, it fits into this entire thing. It's literally called Warrior Monks. So I'm waiting for that to come in. The Night Monks of Vichy France, Uriage, 1940 to 1942 by John Helm. And it goes into the Catholic extremist element that makes up these networks. So that'll be interesting. So we're talking about this U.S. Ambassador Anthony J. Drexel Biddle exposing this Synarchist government. So when people say, oh, the Synarchy didn't exist, no, you're stupid. This banking oligarchical. Okay, so the Bank of Worms. This is where we left off. Oh, and another Habsburg Orleans. Wow, man. Everything's so becomes so cogent. Some of those had been in the Daladier government before the war. Biddle's dispatches include the names of a very powerful group of commercial bankers who were servicing the blue blood oligarchy of Europe, and especially their Habsburg Orleans-led Hitler dictatorship, above and beyond the political parties, that is, above right and left. First, there was the Bank of Worms, which was behind Admiral Darlan, defense minister of Vichy. The synarchist control of Vichy government was represented by the Hippolyte Worms, Jacques Bernard, and Gabriel Leroy Ladoure, who were the top banking controllers of the entire Vichy government. This national banking oligarchical brain trust also oversaw the Banque Nationale du Commerce et de l'Industrie, which was the bank of Vichy Prime Minister Pierre Laval, the Banque de l'Indochina, which was controlled by Minister Paul Baudouin, the Banque de Paris et des Pays-Bas, which was run by Frederick Bloch Lane and linked to J.P. Morgan interests in the United States. All above were tied to Lazarus Ferris banking interests in Paris, London, and New York. And the New York headquarters of that was in 30 Rockefeller, which also the Mortimer Bloomfield and British Special Operations Executive um, organization was running out of the same building as well. A quick survey of Biddle's dispatches shows the key ministries over which the synarchist bankers had control. On the one hand, Pierre Pouchet, Interior, and Yves Baudelaire, National Economy, were members of the Worms clique. Gerard Burgerate, Secretary of State for Aviation, was included by some among Pétain's personal followers, by others among the Worms group. Excluding Burgerate, the Secretaries of State were almost to a man associates of the same clique. They were Jacques Bernard, delegate for the Franco-German economics relation, Jerome Carporpino, education, Sergei Huard, family and wealth, Admiral Platon, colonies, Rene Bellin, labor, Francis Lehindo, industrial production, Jean Berthelot, communications, and Paul Charbon, food supply. The American Chief of Research and Analysis Branch of the Office of Strategic Services, 1942 to 45, William L. Langer, reported that Jacques Benoit Mecken, in charge of Franco-German relations, was a journalist long associated with German ambassador Otto Abetz, and according to all reports, a mere stooge of the Germans. Among the Worm group should be mentioned a large number of somewhat subordinate officials, chiefly secretaries general like Lem Mirand, Borotra, Ravaland. These are all names I don't know, so it's hard to read this. Lafond, Million, Deroy, Philippe, Schwartz, and Billiot. From this list appears once the practically every minister and secretaryship touching economic affairs was in the hands of one or another of the Worms clique. Okay, there's only a page and a half left. So. As Delegate General Jacques Bernard was the top man to coordinate everything relating to finance or economic matters between France and Germany. It was Bernard, the Felix Rohatyn of the Worms Group, who had prepared the financial side of Nazi invasion of France. Coincidentally, all of the Lazard Fairs and Bank Worms associates had already transferred large reserves of currency to the south of France just prior to the invasion. Whatever Lavard, Darlan, or Pétain decided to with respect to Germany had ultimately to be approved by Bernard. The fact that this banking group was operating above and beyond French and German interest was further confirmed by other intelligence sources on the Synarchy, which had established the conspiracy which brought down the Third Republic of France in 1939 to 40. It was actually based in London. French intelligence report signed by M.R. Digand had established on October 6, 1944. The business of Bank of Worms always follows the intimate Anglo-French Entente and operates from directives which are always given by London and agreed to by Paris. In fact, the Bank of Worms is the bank whose policies had brought about the situation of August 1939, and that is where it is unprecedented success finds its true explanation. The statement is valid for the period which ends on September 2nd, 1939, but it appears to be even more surprising to find that the Bank of Worms withstood the shock and was consolidated the day after the armistice, growing under the ministries of Léon Blum, Daladier, and Paul Renaud. It is, first of all, very hard to explain how it was able to come out of the revolution or out of the evolution that led to the collapse of the Third Republic and the triumph with the rise of the Pétain government. Logically, the bank should have collapsed with the government of Renaud. This banking oversight, however, not difficult to understand once the distinction made by the founder of Synarchy, Joseph Alexander St. Ives, called Dialverde, between authority and power is established. So two different Martinists, Dialverde, I guess, wrote a book on authority and power and distinguished the two. The Bank of Worms was protected by the financial oligarchy, acting as a privy council that Alverde had defined as synarchy. That is, a form of government where men who dispose of power are subordinated to those who control the authority. This is the key to this whole synarchist business. Langer identified the crucial elements of this interface between the synarchist banking and Laval government. That is, authority as distinct from power. And this is how they wish to control the Pope. The men with the power are those who, I guess in this, the men with the authority are those who hold the Pope hostage, and the Pope is the one with the power. But you have to listen to the Pope because in the traditionalist mindset, papal infallibility is defined in the way that you define something in the Napoleonic Code. I mean, actually not even that you would read the Napoleonic codification of the law as the law in itself instead of the system of jurisprudence, which evolves out of canon law in the early church that is long since forgotten, I guess. But going on, this is how this distinction between authority and power is defined. Here's a quote. From this list, it appears at once that practically every ministry or secretaryship touching economic affairs. Wait, what the hell? I just read this. What's going on? I'm being mind hacked by angry Dyerites. From this list, it appears at once that practically every ministry or secretaryship touching on economic affairs was in the hands of one or another of the Worms clique. As a whole, they were self-interested and unscrupulous. Petro, of whom quite a bit became known through his trial for treason, was an excellent organizer and a man who, in his point of ambition, was hardly second to Darlan himself. He had been closely associated with the Cagoulard and other pre-war fascist movements. As an agent of the cartel, the steel cartel, he had sought to promote cooperation between French and German heavy industries. In other words, he, like several others, had a collaborationist past and was not only willing but also eager to join up with the enemy. Darlan could count on these men who not only arranged for the shipments of goods and manufactured products to Germany, but also served as go-betweeners in arranging the transfer of French manufacturing establishments to German ownership of control. Needless to say, they turned up pretty penny in the process and furthered their own affairs at that time. The economic collaborationist authority, which was the very real thing from the outset, was not affected by the vicissitudes of political collaboration. Power. It was well established before the war and served well the purposes of both German and French interests. All the collaborationist banks had considerable interest in North Africa and other French colonies and maintained branches there. The Bank of Worms, for example, owned extensive mines, shipping lines, and commercial companies in North Africa. It also, like others, rapidly drained North Africa of such resources as could be made available to the Germans. It is estimated that during the 1941 alone, some 5 million tons of goods were landed at the French Mediterranean ports, mostly from North Africa. Included were strategic minerals of cobalt, molybdenum, manganese, and high-grade iron ore, to say nothing of the foodstuffs. Probably 60 to 80% of all these imports went to the Germans. Fortunately for them, the great banking and industrial interests, always intent on playing safe, were permitted by the Germans to transfer their huge profits to North African branches. Calculations have been shown that prior to the invasion of the North Africa, the French banks taken together transferred no less than 25 billion francs in this way. Today, the Bank of Worms and Lazard Ferris interests are essentially the same Nazi international forces as those represented by synarchist banker Felix Rohatyn. Also, the same synarchist cabal is represented in France by the neocon group of Circulo Azincourt, of former IMF Director Michel Camdesis, Minister of Interior Nicolas Sarkozy, and Edouard de Rothschild, as well as the Publicis Group, which includes as directors Gerard Worms of Rothschild, Michael David Weil of Lazard Ferris, and Felix Rohatyn, also of Rothschild and former Lazard Ferris. This whole Synarchy International crowd represents the same danger of launching preemptive wars and perpetual warfare around the world today, as did the Bank of Worms with Hitler in France of 1940. That is the reason why Lyndon LaRouche repeated his emphatic point in saying, again, speaking bluntly, the gravest danger to the world today comes from the Synarchist International, including Schultz, Cheney, and Rohatyn. They are seeking a Reichstag-fire 9/11 type incident to give them the psychological leverage to launch the pre-planned attack on Iran. That can only be prevented by placing a very powerful public spotlight on their schemes in advance. That is why I'm speaking out today. Now, let's see, the LaRouche movement eventually moved into the Council for National Policy circles, which are controlled by the World Anti-Communist League. Right before, sometime during the 2008 crisis, between there and Trump's presidency, the LaRouche movement had actually been doing a demonstration against Felix Rohatyn, holding signs saying Felix Rohatyn's a Nazi and all of these things. And at that event, they say he was on a date with Donald Trump. So he's on a lunch date with Donald Trump. Right before the election of Donald Trump, I believe, or before he won the nomination, they were saying, don't be a chump for Trump. As soon as Trump was elected, they changed their tune. I think they established a relationship with the Council for National Policy. And from there on, they've been basically supporting Trump. Now they're trying to support Tulsi Gabbard. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on with this outlet, but they've stopped producing this kind of content, and they've gone to something you might read out of a boomer conservative thing. It has a lot of very snide, cynical kind of journalism, but it's not historical. It's not investigative like EIR was even into 2006. But if you look at other countries, people like Pierre Bourdieu are still doing investigations. Pierre Bourdieu just put out a great investigation into the Venetian Empire. So I think maybe they just gave up on America because of the way the population is, and they're trying more for Canada and France, but I don't know. So we've addressed the Synarchist International that produced somebody like Louis Saleron, who's connected to Father Krohn. We've kind of loosely connected how all of these things tie into a world order. And it's basically, we are stuck in this period of the eternal return, and which is actually more of a concept of Joseph de Maistre and the counter-Enlightenment than it is of Nietzsche. A lot of the people inspired by Russian Martinism were also reading Nietzsche. Some of them gave into kind of Dionysian attitudes for a while, but then turned over to an Apollinian one, which is kind of like a Christianized cult concept. But de Maistre really has this kind of eternal return concept, and that's why we're stuck in the cycle, because the cycle is based on that very principle of keeping you in a cycle of death and regrowth, and trying to prolong and trying to create a dark age. Finally, as a point of finality, I have some good quotes just about the Evolian Fascist right. They kind of demonstrate that this is so the Club of Rome, the Club of Rome was founded by all of these former Nazis and Evolian Fascists. They endorsed Greta Thunberg. I call her the wild Thornburg berry. I say that ironically because that's really a bad name. But I have these quotes somewhere. I'm trying to think. They're in a document. In this document. They're in the other document. But there's quotes from the mouth of Benoist that I remember. He wrote an entire work on the Imperium. This is something that Jay Dyer uses to attack people in terms of their political views. Um, they're trying to resurrect the same thing. The Evolian Fascists are talking about the Imperium, which is this Orthodox concept. Um, it's kind of like a cult around the king. Okay. And it doesn't make any sense if you know anything about Russian history. But anyway, going on here. If it'll let me access this freaking file. It's loading. Don't you worry. I clicked it 3 times and it has to load 3 times. Great. Should just make it load faster if you click it more. And these are things that I'm trying to pass around on social media, but I think people are self-censor and they're also censored. So here's a quote about Swiss fascism. The essence of the CINF brand of fascism, which can be identified as Swiss fascism, a fascism without nations, was formulated in Barnes's 1928 book, The Universal Aspects of Fascism, was later summoned up by an epiphany. The objective that Barnes was aiming at was the end of all nations and the unification of the human race under one structure. However, he stated that the national fascism was the most apt way to reach such an aim. Swiss nobleman Gonzague de Reynold, a confidant of Mussolini and prominent figure in the Swiss elite, pushed the same conception, a Middle Europa brand of fascism, just as that of his colleague, another Mussolini confidant, Prince Julius Evola, who imbued Heinrich Himmler with the deranged ideals of Graul and Argotha. Another quote: "The genetic parenthood of the racial irrationalist nonsense is unequivocally George Disraeli, Count de Gobineau, Houston Stuart Chamberlain, Prince Julius Evola, and Count Goldenhove Kalergi. In short, the remnants of the old European oligarchy and its aspiring servants that resolved to provoke the new Dark Age as the only means for stopping the industrial alliance of sovereign republics stretching across Western Europe into Asia and linking up with the United States. The achievement of that development would have brought the British oligarchy's existence as a species to an end." These are quotes from Executive Intelligence Review that I just collected because they summed everything up pretty well. But this one actually quotes Alain de Benoist. Propagandist of the new right, Alain de Benoist, asserts that the spirit of the earth determining the regional cultures must destroy urban industrial civilization. Why? Today's world reduces diversity and only thinks in terms of merchant efficiency. Such a social involution determined, he claimed, the metapolitical formation of technomorphic doctrine proper to both the US and USSR, and there the new right lets the cat out of the bag. American imperialism is an imperialism without an imperium. And Alain de Benoist has an entire article about this that I'm going to read maybe today, because this is something that Jay Dyer is constantly talking about. Another quote: "The new right makes no bones about the need to destroy industrial capitalism if the higher spiritual principle is to be realized, and the Dionysian heart of hearts of the European soul." Remember, the heart of hearts in Orthodox theology is the nous, I believe. This is that thing where you actually can't come to God through reason. You have to come to God through this third thing. And this is why, if you don't agree with Jay Dyer, you have to repent, because you can't actually know God but through the heart of hearts. And that's why you have this focus on hesychasm and viewing this divine light. So Alain de Benoist is very familiar, even though he's anti-Christian, very familiar with Orthodox teachings. So he says, spiritual principle is to be realized by the Dionysian heart of hearts of the European soul, is the reemergence in accordance with the hyper-aesthetics created by 19th century by Britain's ideologue of white superiority, John Ruskin, who I mentioned creates the distributists and Fabian socialists, both of them, both are disciples of John Ruskin, and by cultist Richard Wagner. Explicit in the doctrines of the New Right, as well is the rejection of the Pauline and Augustinian or Neoplatonic mainstream of Christianity and the reduction of the church to a mass social control institution. This is another one about a major figure in the French New Right, around Benoist, and it quotes him at the end. Paul Wells, who is currently director of the New Right's mainstream media stronghold, the weekly Figaro magazine, used his best-selling review Pianete to systematically peddle illegal drugs, use of all varieties of irrational cults, beliefs in UFOs, science fiction, Oriental religions, magic, occultism. Paul Wells is a former disciple of Gurdjieff, the magician of the old Tsar's secret police of Okhrana. Remember, Gurdjieff is the guy that the Yevgeny Golovin circle that basically trained Alexander Dugin came out of. Paul Wells is a former disciple of Gurdjieff, the magician of the old Tsar's secret police Okhrana, and himself an ideologue of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. More importantly, Paul Wells is the man who introduced LSD to France and personally bears the heaviest responsibility for the mass spread of psychotropic drugs in France, and the European side of the Aldous Huxley-run operation. No wonder we see Paul Wells and de Buenos collaborate under the slogan of death to capitalism, death to socialism, death to reason, long live a Europe of regions. This final quote is very revealing because this is the Duginite ideology. This is what the revival of political hesychasm, neo-orthodoxy of Dugin, and a person like Jay Dyer is falling into, is this promotion. And they don't need to be Evolian fascists because Evolian fascists are kind of Romanesque. They are Italian. They are of a certain region. The Orthodox are of another kind of worldview. But they all kind of serve the same agenda, this ultimate end goal. So that's that. Like and subscribe if you learned something. It really does help me out. I want to get these ideas out, but it seems like this kind of thing is heavily censored, especially as YouTube progresses down the toilet. Maybe I'll start making Fortnite videos or something, and drop some red pills on and black pills on 14-year-olds in Fortnite. Maybe you'll watch that. But thanks a lot. Like, subscribe, share, tweet this at Jay Dyer if you have a Twitter. And go check out Father Fernandez Krohn's social media. Maybe subscribe to him. He desperately needs some help. He's looking to recruit some new fascists. So, all right, have a good one. This has been I Read Old Magazines. God bless you all, and thanks for watching. Bye.